Hello! So, apparently, in the last video where I read stuff from my book, I was not very loud. I have since figured out a way of fixing that, which means I will be able to upload that video again with the better video audio quality, and that'll be fantastic. That won't be for a while because it does take a while for these uploads to happen, and I'm not sure when I'll be able to fit that in. I'll try to do that as soon as possible. Until then, if you tried to watch that video and you're just like, I have no idea what's going on, I can't hear anything, I have no idea what she's saying, here's a recap of the first chapter. So the first chapter is called Funeral. In there we find out that Dagny, the main character, her brother died. He was the only boy of the family. And so the funeral the funeral happens towards the beginning, and stuff happens and people are sad, understandably. And what's something that is important is how Kai, her brother, was buried. Is he was put into kind of a mound with which was ended up like a bricked up entrance, which was kind of more of a pagan type of funeral in Iceland, and not so much based after a Christian one, just because Kai had loved hearing about like all the Icelandic sagas and hearing about kings and stuff like that, and so his father wanted to do that for him. And at one point it gets the bricks on there. This is actually important for the story, I promise. At one point the bricks get accidentally kicked in, and then Dagny's uncle goes and fixes it. That all happens. That's done. After the funeral, Dagny goes outside, goes out into these hills and this kind of really beautiful landscape, and yells at God because she's just like, why would you take my brother from me? What the heck? And she wants him to say something to her. She wants him to do something, and she doesn't hear anything. And so she decides, well, I guess he doesn't have anything to say. And so she's like, well, God, show me a sign. And a polar bear starts coming towards her, and she's like, holy crap, God must hate me, and ran home. When she gets home, she can't see the polar bear, and that's kind of the end of that. So now let's get to chapter 2 in this lovely paperback. This is the one that you'll get if you buy it off of Amazon CreateSpace when the time comes. There is actually another version that I have, and it's only for conventions and stuff like that. And it's a little bit more purple. Same cover, just a little bit more purple. Okay, here we go. Chapter 2. In my father's house. 3 weeks after the funeral, our ram went mad and killed several of our sheep before we could stop him. As my father and I held him, his rage finally calm, he shuddered and died. The next day, my oldest sister, Ire, found the rest of the sheep dead, their stomachs torn open and their guts arranged around their bodies in a grotesque artistry. She ran into the house, screaming, and it took my mother and me a long time to calm her. Father went out to the pasture to clean up the remains without a word. It took him most of the day, so Mother sent us out in turns to do what we could of his usual responsibilities. When he came inside for supper, he kissed her and thanked us before collapsing into his chair. Despite his quick work, by noon the next day the entire village knew what had happened on our farm. Father Simon came to our house that evening to inform us of the rumors our friends and family had been spreading and asked if any were true. They say a legion of demons possessed your sheep and made them kill each other. My father had no choice but to explain to the priest what had happened, his voice soothing as he blamed it on nothing more than a disease of madness whose spread he had stopped. It would not pass to the rest of the village. I was washing clothes as Father Simon voiced concerns. Seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, I turned my attention to what had been the sheep pasture. In it stood a child, its skin a dark blue that had nearly turned to black. As it approached the house, I recognized it. It moved with the lithe purpose of a predator, and its eyes held years its bodies could not have possibly seen. But I recognized it. The clothes slipped from my hands, splashing me with water I didn't feel, and my stomach wrung so tight I could barely keep it from emptying. It was Kai. My brother, his corpse returned to life. I screamed and fell back, arms instinctively outstretched as if to ward off evil. My father and the priest rushed to me, but my throat had sealed itself, and I could only point at the apparition. They both crossed themselves when they saw him. He stood at the edge of the pasture, smiled. "Did you like my gift, Father?" Gone was the lisp of childhood, the warmth of love. All that remained was the cold and the dark. My father shuddered. The corpse gave him a sour look. "Then I shall have to give you more." He sped back across the field and out of sight, the three of us watching. I tried to calm my ragged breathing, but the hand that had wrapped itself around my heart had grabbed hold of my lungs as well. "I shouldn't have allowed that pagan burial," said Father Simon, his voice shaking. He crossed himself again and left my father and me to understand what we had just seen. Oh, God. My brother, I thought. My Kai. A Joyeux. 2 weeks later, our goats succumbed to the same madness as the sheep. Rumors flew around the village that we had been cursed because of the barrow Kai had been buried in, that we held some secret sin in our family, and that the Joyeux had appeared to punish us, that father had turned to paganism and had called up his son from the dead, only to find a monster had come instead. People avoided us in church, refused to speak to us more than necessary. Even our relatives kept themselves separate, and no longer invited us to their homes for any reason. No one came to our house, not when invited, not even for business. Walking through the streets made me feel filthy with stares. At the end of those weeks, late in the evening, someone knocked on the door. My father stood to answer it. "What if it's—" Mother stared at him, her expression strained. Father shook his head and motioned that we stay back. He opened the door. "Ari, I'm so sorry." Oyvind fell at my father's feet, his entire body shaking with sobs. "What are you talking about? Get up, man." But no matter how my father tried, Oyvind would not rise, would not stop crying. "It's because of me your son has come back to haunt you. When I fixed that hole in the barrow door, I was embarrassed and wanted only to be done. So I only made it look like I'd put enough mortar between the bricks. It would have been easy for a Joyeux to find the cracks and tear them open. I did this to you." Father knelt down and held his brother for a long time. Finally he calmed, and they both stood again. "You have done nothing to me. I forgive you." No. I couldn't stand to listen, so I fled to the cow pasture. My own uncle had been the one to cause this. He hadn't done it on purpose. That much would be clear to anyone who had seen him at the funeral, to anyone who had seen him with my father. I wanted to hate him. "And so the Ice Princess adds another wall to her castle," said a sibilant voice, soft with mockery. The Joyeux that my brother had become sat, legs dangling on the fence. His face, swollen with death, still carried an unsettling resemblance to the little boy I held in my heart, but the eyes were cold with calculation. His skin, more blue than black in the sunlight, glistened as if it were coated unevenly with oil. I breathed carefully, trying to slow my heart. "Are you here to kill me?" "I couldn't I?" He cocked his head to one side, and some of his hair fell away, hanging like dead snakes. I swallowed, my mouth gone dry, and my tongue stuck to my throat. The Joyeux gave a short bark of a laugh. "Oh, but you will be the first to leave the world of the living. Mother and father will outlive this, as will all our sisters, but you— I will wait a while yet." Joyeux are said to know the future, and this prophecy pierced my heart with winter steel. Liar, I will see your end. Oh, certainly, but not with those eyes. I shut out the sight of him and clenched my skirt as if it would make him vanish in reality. Make it vanish. It didn't. As we settled into bed that night, the joker climbed up onto the roof. We could hear its shoes scrape against the walls, its weight on the turf above. For a moment, silence fell, and I lay rigid under my blankets. We all did, rigid and barely breathing as we waited to find out what it would do. I thought it would break through and fall upon us, or that it would destroy the house and leave us to the elements. Instead, it started beating on the roof, a steady drumming that shook the turf without damaging it. Relieved, I turned over and tried to sleep. The pounding continued the entire night, incessantly, rhythmically. We would nearly become used to the pattern, then it would change and we would all sit up straight in our beds, the hair on our necks standing on end. I couldn't understand why it didn't just tear the house down and kill us. Why would it toy with us like this? But with every two beat, I could hear my name. Dagny, Dagny, Dagny. The first to leave the world of the living. God, you heard what it said. If you truly cared about my family, you would make it kill me. You don't really want that, surely. It didn't matter what I wanted. God wouldn't give it to me. Oithen may have weakened that door, but God could have stopped all this terror from coming through. Didn't he work out all things for good for those that love him? Did we not love him? Oh, my child, you do not see. Oh, of course not. Your ways are higher than mine, I muttered, and then lay back in bed and covered my head with my pillow to keep out the sound of the blows, and tried to sleep. For weeks this continued, thinning our tempers and carving youth from our faces. We wanted to stop the menace, but what could we do? Draugr have strength and cunning beyond that of the living. They can cause a person to go mad, curse them, bring the wind and rain against them. We prayed, of course, but anything more was beyond our power. My mother began to look sick with exhaustion. Father took to spending all his time out in the fields and tending the animals, no matter whether they truly needed it. My sisters and I got into so many arguments over silly things that I stopped speaking to anyone. It allowed me some energy to avoid falling asleep in the middle of the day, and the tongue lashing from my mother I would have to endure after. Our entire crop of rye fell prey to some kind of blight my father had never encountered before. He left the grain hollow, and the plants withered and useless. Before long my father would go out to his ruined fields only to sit, unmoving, with the dust blowing around him in the cold wind. The vegetables succumbed to another disease. I cut open a potato one day only to find that it had turned to liquid on the inside, and the white slime spilled onto my hands and the table. My stomach turned over and I ran outside to vomit. Even after emptying myself, I couldn't stop retching. My insides twisted into more and more unnatural positions with every spasm. Similar misfortunes started passing to the rest of the village, and, one by one, all of our neighbors, friends, and relatives left. Even Oithen, though he and father spent nearly half a day together before he did. Soon we were the only people who remained in the entire town, cut off by the monster. That monster. What had we done to deserve this? The day the horse died, a storm blew in, which darkened the sky such that it seemed the entire world had turned black. The joiner stayed out of his barrow at all times, and we stayed in the house with the door locked and barricaded in case it might try to come inside. "Father, this can't go on," said Ira that day at supper. "We have to leave or we'll starve." "Where will we go?" Father asked. "The farm is ruined. It doesn't matter where we go, so long as it isn't here, with that thing." She stared at him with wide eyes, her jaw clenched. Father sighed and stirred his soup while the rest of us waited, motionless, for his decision. The joiker who had been my brother crashed violently against the roof, causing bits of turf to fall onto the table. We will not leave. Protestations rose up all around the table, but I remained silent, as did Mother. I raised my eyebrows at her, as she was always the last to hold from speech. She indicated my father's face. His lips were thin, set, and his eyes remained on his soup. She was right. Some time since the joy's arrival, without our noticing, he had set his mind on this matter. He wouldn't change it, no matter how loud anyone spoke against him. We may be lapping death up from a shell right now, but we have to trust God to show us a way through it. He will take care of us, show us what we need to do. I snorted. That's why Father Simon was the first to leave, no doubt. The room grew utterly silent. Even the joiker had stopped its pounding. I bit my tongue. Those words had only been meant for the confines of my own mind. We're not leaving, said my father, his voice low, and that's all we will say on the matter. Outside, the joiker began to laugh, the pitch rising from bass through to soprano and then up and up until we could no longer hear it. That is the end of chapter 2. Stay tuned for more soon.